Thank you for joining us. And just a few housekeeping things before we start. If you have any questions, we have a Q&A section at the end. And you can also submit some questions through the chat as we go along, and we'll try and answer those at the end. So let's get the ball rolling on this. So my name is Andrew Maguire. I'm product marketing at VMware, and joining me today is Ben Abbott, who is with the technical field operations, and he's going to be doing the technical deep dive into user reporting phishing. And so what we're going to do is just set up a few slides for you. If you could advance the deck, please, Ben. For some reason, it's not advancing. There we go. So we are just going to quickly level set so everybody's on the same page. Where are we with phishing attacks? Some quick slides on phishing by the numbers, the different types of phishing attacks, so that we're all familiar, and some of the cool tools that that attackers are using to actually create these different types of campaigns and attacks. And really then, why is user-reported phishing needed? And then we're going to hand it over to Ben, and he's basically going to explain how it works. He's going to give some examples, he's going to do some demos, and also show some analysis of some very recent phishing attacks that we've seen. And then we're going to wrap it up. So let's get started. So as most of us already know, that email is still the #1 attack vector when it comes to trying to attempt breaches on organizations. So they're very opportunistic, and they can also be very targeted as well. So it's anywhere between 90 to about 94% of data breaches are due to phishing attacks. And we've seen the sophistication of these attacks increase across the years. And I'll show you some statistics on how effective they have been and which types of attacks are really actually paying off for these attackers. And you can also see on the chart on the right, the most common security concerns. Phishing is still #1, top of mind, the thing that keeps SOC teams awake at night, along with ransomware, which is pretty high up there too. So the average cost of a data breach in 2022 is about 4.3 million. When I started this about 25 years ago, it was about 400,000, and it's gone exponentially increased every year. The percentage of phishing attacks that are targeting credential theft, which is really the #1 type of phishing attack right now, is around about 58%. And we're seeing that number go up daily. As I mentioned before, 90 to 94% of malware is delivered by email, and 50% of people who fell for phishing emails because they were tired or distracted. Now, we actually have a phishing simulation in-house at VMware where all our employees are trained. And in fact, this is the only one time that I've ever fell foul of one of these phishing simulation attacks, is because I was rushed. I was trying to go to a meeting, trying to get through my email quickly. And the moment I clicked on the link, I knew I'd done the wrong thing. But it is very, very easy to be distracted or engrossed in what you're doing and make a very simple mistake, and it costs the company dearly. And the average age, or the age group that fell most for the phishing attacks in 22, was between 18 to 24 years old. So just so we're all on the same page, phishing, sort of the origins of phishing, or were really sort of what they call a shotgun attack. They're basically deception-based. It's really sending out a shotgun blast of emails to a very wide audience, and typically it's a link or an email with an attachment that they try and get you to open. It's often masquerading as a known brand, but it's very the success rate is not very good, right? If typically it's a very low success rate. But there were times years ago where you could look at a phishing email and see, oh, that was probably written in China. Oh, that was probably written in Russia. But now with the advent of things like ChatGPT, you're not going to be able to see those differences anymore. So the other type of phishing is spear phishing. So spear phishing or whaling is a more targeted approach to email compromise. And attackers are generally gathering OSINT on the target. So they'll go and look for any publicly available sources about the company, about the people in the company, and then they'll target those emails specifically within the organization. And so the emails are typically crafted using people's names or job functions. And the recipient typically believes that the email originated from business colleagues internally, or sometimes a trusted vendor. And they'll typically target high profile or senior level employees within that organization and try and masquerade as them. Credential harvesting, as I said, it's really the #1 type of phishing attack right now. They use stolen credentials from vendors and other supply chain partners to attack a target. And they'll use cloned websites from which the attackers harvest their login credentials. Typically, they end up pillaging financial accounts and selling that stolen data and confidential information. And then finally, we have farming attacks. So this is hijacking the browser settings or running a background process that redirects to a malicious site. They're a lot more difficult to detect, but they'll also access financial data, harvest the user credentials, and if it's not a browser setting, they can also do things like DNS poisoning to redirect to a clone malicious site rather than the original. So here's a couple of examples of the tools that you can use to very, very quickly, very quickly, within less than 5 minutes, create a phishing website with a link that you can then, basically set up, and you can either host it locally, or you can have some tunneling options like ngrok. Nfisher, BlackEye, they all use ngrok to provide that tunneling, and it's actually built into the tools as well. And then it gives you basically a URL link that you can then mask using any one of the options there, like bit.ly, tinyURL. If you want to do a temporary URL, so it's not available after a certain period of time, you can do that. But very, very powerful. The difference between all of these different tools is really the quality of the website that they create to be able to capture those credentials or fake out the user. So BlackEye may be good, for example, for doing an Amazon site, whereas Nfisher may be really good for Microsoft or LinkedIn. So, why is user-reported phishing needed? We have all of these perimeter controls that are supposed to be getting it before it actually enters the network and the enterprise. But unfortunately, they are fallible to zero-hour attacks. And as you saw previously, you can create a website and a link and send it out to somebody in a matter of minutes. There's something around the region of 1.2 million phishing websites. And that's a very elastic number. They're going up and down all the time. But that's really why you need user-reported phishing, because a lot of the perimeter gateway controls are very static. And yes, they have machine learning and AI to a certain extent, but attackers are finding ways to circumvent this constantly. And they're always changing the game. It's always an arms race. The moment you put in a security control, they'll find a way to circumvent it. So really a third-party evaluation solution is required to be able to, if something is suspicious, be able to put it in there and validate whether it is malicious or not. Interestingly, 80% of successful phishing attacks are clicked by traditionally the same 20% of users. And that's a statistic that you can actually measure if you use one of these phishing simulation attacks. and help correct the errors of the ways of people that continually do the same thing over and over again. So the only way really to identify a lot of this advanced, previously unknown malware is to detonate them in a safe sandbox environment. So the challenge here is that not only are they using evasion techniques to bypass the gateway controls, they're also doing what's called anti-sandbox evasion, where the malware is actually looking for identifiers within the environment that it sits to figure out whether it's being monitored or not. It may be looking for certain DLLs, it may be looking for certain debugging options, it may be looking to see whether it's in a VM or not. And there are other things that they employ to fake out the sandbox. For example, they'll do a time delay. So you click on the file and then it will wait maybe 3, 5, 10 minutes before it actually dumps the payload. So it's very easy for that malware to potentially be identified as benign and then released into the environment when it's actually not. So you actually have to, if you're looking at a sandbox solution, you really want to make sure that that malware can't be fooled into thinking that, or it can be fooled into thinking that it's not in a monitoring environment. And user-reported phishing is really a symbiotic relationship with education. So VMware doesn't provide any education on phishing, but there are a number of companies that do, and it really is a partnership that you have to work with if you want to do this sort of thing. So educating end users on phishing really helps reduce the risk of IT and increases the detection rates, right? So you have a lot more eyeballs on these emails that are coming in. And if you educate your users and you build awareness and ingrain best practices, you can really increase things like the detection rate. The other challenge is that you can also potentially increase the false positive rate. And that's going to put a bigger strain on your SOC team initially. Now, the way to address that is by automating the triage and analysis of these submitted, user-reported and submitted phishing emails. But there is quite a significant difference in the success failure of these phish types. So if you do use one of these phishing simulations, you'll see that actually credential harvesting is one of the harder attacks to go through to a certain extent, because there is that second challenge, that authentication challenge, that gives people pause and think, I clicked on the link, do I really need to submit my credentials? Because, and something, it basically tips somebody off to say, there's potentially something fishy going on here, no pun intended. But then links are the most clicked and attachments are the second most clicked. But these phishing simulators really are great tools. They help build awareness and you can measure the user's behavior and also prove compliance. So on the right here, we just have a couple of examples of some of the phishing programs that are out there. And if you don't have one employed right now, it's definitely worth taking a look. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ben. Oh, sorry.
Oh. We both went back. All right, here we go. So how VMware aims to help this is to make it easier for the investigation of these user-reported emails. So if you have a lot of users reporting suspicious emails, then it takes time for your team to investigate each of these and then respond to the users in what they would, in the time, that period that they would want, which for them is probably immediately. But obviously a lot of these take some time to investigate properly and determine if it's truly something that you would want in your environment or not. And so a few different ways that we aim to help you all is one, we have our own kind of built-in abuse mailbox, which we call our IR mailbox. And this is a way that users can, if you already have a method for users to report suspicious emails, you can set up that created email address within our platform for that to automatically forward over to. And that will then unpack the components of the email, so any of the URLs or attachments inside of it. And then those will go through our analysis, whether it's reputation, also static analysis, and then we can also do a full dynamic analysis on both the URLs and any attachments inside of those. And so that can, one, just help speed up your own investigation, because this can be all done automatically by our team. It doesn't require anyone on yours to be able to click on anything inside of that email, but also also just makes it so that even with someone that doesn't have a high level expertise on malware reversing or even just malware analysis itself, that they can get a clear report and understanding of what would happen for a user if that did come through. And they can also see if with any of the IOCs that come back, if there's anything, maybe a different user had clicked on it that you're unaware of, and you can go and search to see if any of those components are inside the environment already. We can also work with SOAR platforms as well. So a lot of SOAR technologies have something like this built in already. And so if you're leveraging a tool like that, that's also another way to leverage any user reported phishing, is to use a tool like this to extract out the components of that email. Or again, you could use that to submit the email to us directly through the IR mailbox. So there's a few different ways you could go about that. Or in here, you could leverage the API. So once you've extracted out any URLs or attachments, maybe you want to go through some filtering on your end first. Maybe you have some of your own threat intelligence that you want to check, say the URLs against, or the hash values of those files against, to see if maybe it needs to go through a dynamic analysis. And maybe once you determine maybe it does, then you can send those over via API. And again, we can go through any of the automated analysis for that already. So it really can help your team speed up the analysis of any of these user-reported phishing emails, and then also just get information back to the user a lot faster with the details that they need. And so with that, I'll go into our platform to show you how that would work. And actually, to start out, I'm just going to go to our automation dashboard. So we do have kind of a more general dashboard if you're just looking to see any of the recent submissions within the platform. But what we also have is we have dashboards for any of the automation that you might set up here. So say with both the IR mailbox, and you can see everything that might be coming through there and go into any of those reports from there. Same with any SOAR technologies that you might be using and be able to see everything that might come through this. We also make it very easy to set these up. So whether it's configuring the IR mailbox and be able to get that email address, so you can set that up with any of your abuse mailbox workflow that you already have, or again, we also have an Outlook add-in that you can leverage as well. Maybe if you don't already have a way for users to flag suspicious emails, all they have to do is they can click a button and it can automatically forward to that created email address. Or with SOAR technologies, and we have a lot of different connectors that are already out of the box. But here you can get, the API key to set those up, or you can also look to see how to integrate each of those. Now, for the IR mailbox, what's also useful is you can get information that's over to the users directly. So we do also have, we can respond to those users if you'd like. So you also have an option to decide whether you want the users to be notified on any of the submissions they have on the platform, or say maybe just malicious, and they can get an information like this back where they can just see that the mail that they submitted was malicious, and they can get some basic details around that, so they know they can delete that email now, or not, and also let anyone know if they did actually click on anything from there. Your team would also receive a more in-depth email of what was malicious inside of the email, and also a link back to any of the reports that we have within here. And so this is what I'll go over now, is a couple different example reports. So we actually have two different instances where we see Emotet passed over. So one in this first example is going to be through a OneNote sample. So obviously that was a huge thing a few months ago, where OneNote was being used to pass off malware. And it was really just a mechanism and a delivery mechanism for malware to be passed through. And so what we did is a method to actually extract out any of the files, or also it could be any URLs that are inside of those. And then from that, those would be then recursively submitted to our platform. So here we can see actually automatically that, this file that was inside of it was already found to be malicious because we see it there. But we also detonated the file inside of that. And so this we can see here whether, what it might be found as. We can go into any of the identifiers for this and get some basic details of that. So you can see in this case it's Emotet. We also have IOCs out of that, so you can add these to your threat intelligence platforms. We can also do that if, say, maybe instead of a file that's hosting that, instead maybe it's a URL that's hosting that particular malicious file. And so this way, again, the same thing, if that file is automatically downloaded off of that URL, that will then be recursively submitted. And even though, again, we have that that it's already a known malicious URL and it's a known malicious file that downloads, we also can then, maybe if it wasn't known already, we can then extract out that file out of there and see how that would behave on its own. And again, we see the same thing where we see that, we see this downloaded. We can also go into any of the more detailed reports that we may have on this, or again, at kind of a high level, we have a kind of a PDF report that you can leverage. Maybe if you just want to pass this on to like a ticketing system, they already have set up. So there's a different ways to be able to leverage this, and you can still go back to see what it was initially tied to. In this case, whether maybe it was the email directly, maybe the URL or file was tied to, or here we can see that this is the downloaded file from the URL that is submitted, so we can see those here as well. And again, go into the maybe more detailed reports where we can see information, including one thing that we've added relatively recently is this malware configuration extraction. So this allows us to once we've identified a particular malware family, we can then extract out the configuration for this. So that's something you could download. So you can just download directly, but this is also used to add to the IOCs that we're able to extract out, because we can extract out a lot of the components of this. In this case, we see a lot of various URLs from here. And then those are then added to our filtered IOCs, and if we go to URLs, we can see that these are found by them being extracted out of that configuration. So that's where we can really add to some of the investigation, but also the threat intelligence gathering you may want to have afterwards. Now, the other sample I have here is probably obvious to all of us, but it's going to be credential harvesting. And so this is something that you might see from here, whether it's a URL coming through and then maybe a user's clicking on it. And as Andrew said, sometimes at this point, maybe they get a little bit more suspicious if something's maybe not already downloaded. Maybe they get to a point where they have to enter credentials, and maybe that's when they get suspicious. But here we're able to identify this very quickly ourselves. And it's through a combination of heuristics that we have within the tool. So we see whether it's kind of that it contains a Microsoft login form. So very specifically, we're able to determine that this appears to be a Microsoft login form. More generally, we also see that it presents itself as a login page, and that's based off that it contains, just more generically, it says it contains a login form, or again, we have more specific what kind of login form it is, but also see that the title itself indicates that it's a login page. So again, we see something like sign in, that's something that indicated to us that it's a login page. So those in itself doesn't necessarily mean it's suspicious or malicious, but then combined with some of the other heuristics where we see that resources are loaded from temporary hosting sites, that we see that exact favicon of Microsoft is pulled from this. It also has a login, a Microsoft log branded background image. So all of these combined together, we have this kind of global heuristic rule that's triggered to determine it's phishing from there. So that's one method that we can get just based off the heuristics that we see off that page. But others that we can tie into it, that could be something like reputation. So in this case, we already see that the submitted URL is already known, or maybe any of the contacted URLs are known from this. So I can also aid with some of the detection of these, especially maybe if the site is already down, maybe it's already been determined to be malicious and it's been pulled down. But this way that we can get that determination even with that, so to make sure to block that URL as well. But we also have a machine learning two different engines that can help with some of the investigation. So this is also tying into this, so it has its own heuristic checks to make this determination to see if it's phishing just based off the machine learning detection. So a lot of these together, again, we can easily identify, it's phishing just based off those, and can make, again, one that you can respond to the user right away with something like this, so that they know that not to, click on any of the URLs or maybe the attached file inside of that, and to have those run. So that's really what's important here, is how we can help with the investigation and what kind of information we can provide back to the incident response team. And just to kind of go to conclude some of today's call. So we do, beyond some of the Outlook plugin that we have, and some of the SOAR connectors that you see, there's a number of other connectors that we have available, whether it's something like some of the endpoint tools like SentinelOne, or maybe again we have like maybe just a very general Splunk integration if you just want to pull down some of the information that we see from the results or submit URLs from, but also whether it's the Splunk SOAR. We also have connectors where you can do a lot more for submitting files in addition to the URLs or any of the other SOAR technologies we have available, or even some threat intelligence platforms. So even something like MISP or Threat Connect or Threat Quotient that tie into those, and maybe now they can sort of sell us a bit more SOAR tools, but they also can tie into some of the threat intelligence gathering you have from that. And we do have a few different products that can help out with this. So with Deep Response, this would be for any manual submission, so it wouldn't tie in for the API or the IR mailbox, but you can also submit the email manually directly. So maybe if you aren't at scale yet, where there's a lot of users reporting phishing or a lot of email investigations you could still use something like this to get a lot more details out of this, and then still see if any components of that email are malicious. We also have two others that can do more for scaling and automation for Final Verdict, which you can submit everything via either the IR mailbox or the API, and maybe you don't need the manual submissions, but you can still see all of the information from the email that we showed today, or Total Insight, which will have a lot more extraction that you can pull out of those submissions, but still you can have automation in addition to the manual submission. So there's kind of everything that can help out with these type of investigations.
Okay, so just to wrap up, really, so we've seen that you can really take a lot of the workload off of your tier 1 and tier 2 analysts by automation, because it is really time and resource intensive looking at phishing emails or analyzing malware manually. Adding that extra layer of detection by users by providing them education really helps, and that's sort of the human element that we're adding here. But there's also the removal of your tier 1 and tier 2 resources from doing actually the analysis. So it's a double-edged sword, and as I mentioned before, you're increasing the detection, but there's also the chance that you may increase false positives, which at the end of the day is why you want to head down the automation route. So I think we have a couple of questions. Let's see if Ben.
I can start at the top there. So is there any tool for OSINT by VMware? So we don't have anything out of the box, but we do also have the Open REST API. So that's definitely something you could leverage for any customized integrations, or something that we'd also be able to help out with your team in setting those up. There's a couple questions within, or a couple questions within there. So if a file's downloaded URL, can you tell which automations you have to make sure the files are downloaded? So with this, we do have some automation or some computerized, clicking as part of that. So that's something that we can click through. So whether it's maybe there's a link to within, say, like a OneDrive link, or like a a fake, like a OneNote, and then that either leads to the download file, or maybe that goes to the the credential harvesting site. And so that is something that we have built into the tool to automatically click on those kind of links that we're seeing. You do also have the ability to interact with these samples yourself. So if that's something you just wanted to see in action, you'll be able to go through those steps. And once that file is downloaded submitted, it'll be automatically recursively submitted in a separate area. For the automatically apply a password from the email. So actually with the IR mailbox, that is something we're able to do. So if you submit the email via our mailbox, we will scan the body of the email for any passwords that are included as part of that. And so if the file is then password protected, that's something we would then apply that password to that file so that we can run that file as it should be. SOAR tools likely have something like this in place already again. So again, you can make sure that if it can pull that out of the email, that password can then be applied to whatever file that's being submitted. But that's definitely something you'd be able to leverage both for.
And Ben, from a deployment perspective, how long does it take to get this up and running?
So what's nice about IR Mailbox is it's minutes. So it's really just configuring whatever settings you want to have for that. So you can choose to, for instance, if you want to triage the samples before they get to dynamic analysis, so you can see if it's, say maybe a sample is already known to be malicious, like we might have seen already. Maybe you're not interested in running the known malicious samples against dynamic analysis. So you can have the fastest response to the users. You could set something like that up available. You can also tweak some other settings. Maybe there's some, how many detonations you want on any particular sample to run. So there's a lot of tweaks to that you can have, but that takes minutes to set up. And then again, with either, if you already have something deployed, you can have set up forwarding, or we also have the Outlook add-in. That's very easy.
Great. And actually, somebody's raising their hand here. Ranjit, if you had a question, we unmute. Oh, I think we've lost him. All right. So if anybody has any questions, if you'd like to submit them at the bottom, we'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. And otherwise, we could wrap it up here. I think what we're going to do is send out a follow-up email to all of you with a link to download a PDF version of the presentation if you need to, and also an additional link to a user-reported phishing ebook that we have that you can also download and peruse. But we have a couple more questions coming in. Is the IR mailbox an extra feature? I cannot access the settings. And this is from Martika.
So it depends on the product that you're leveraging. So with the deep response, that IR mailbox is not part of it, since the deep response is intended to just be for manual usage. So there's no automation in place there. And so that may be why you're not seeing it. Otherwise, if you go to the analysis settings, that would be where you can set that up there.
All right, hopefully that's answered the question. The other thing you can do is, if you're unaware of how to set it up, you can always contact our technical team and support guys to help you through that. And there's a final question from Paxton, which is, what would it look like to have SOAR hooked up to VMware?
Yeah, so obviously with SOAR, kind of both the benefit and also maybe the drawback in some cases is that they are really powerful tools, and there's a lot of different ways that you could leverage it. And so it kind of depends on what workflow they're looking for. So in a case like user-reported phishing, a lot of these tools likely already have a playbook set up for this. And so what you can do from there is leverage those playbooks, and they'll have some way to extract out the URLs and attachments from there. And then what you just need to do is usually they'll have some type of sandbox detonation as part of that playbook. And when you're configuring VMware as part of that, there is within their marketplace, you can set up the integration. And so it's just setting up something like the API key and the URL that you have access to from our platform. So whether it's the US or EU cloud, or maybe you have your own on-prem setup. And so it's just making sure that those are set up, and then you can add VMware as part of that sandbox detonation process, and that will be part of it there.
And then we also enrich those tickets for the SOAR, right, by importing the IOCs and all the other information.
Exactly. And so what that would just be for the detonation, but then once the analysis is completed, there's a lot more data that we can pass back to that playbook again, like whether it's the IOCs or just maybe it's just the verdict of the sample, whatever you might be looking to pull out of that, those can be included from there.
Great. Well, I think we've run out of time, unfortunately, and we'll just leave this here. But I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Hopefully, we've given you enough information on user-reported phishing to get the ball rolling if you're interested in deploying this. And thank you, Ben, for running us through that. Really appreciate the help.
No problem. Thanks all for joining.